A storybook movie-like career is coming to an end for Brandon Graham, announcing his retirement from the Philadelphia Eagles today. We'll send BG off into the sunset. Coming up next, right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm your host, Louie DiBiase. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. What an emotional day. Brandon Graham calling it a career after 15 years in Philadelphia. It feels like just yesterday he was drafted in the first round, and yet it feels like he's been an Eagle my entire life. I don't really know the Eagles without number 55 being out on the field. As a 27-year-old fan that, again, I grew up in the early 2000s. I remember the 2004 Super Bowl, the 2008 NFC Championship heartbreak against the Arizona Cardinals. But as a coherent Eagles fan and now analyst, growing up as a teenager, now as an adult Eagles fan in the 2010s and the 2020s, Brandon Graham has been a part of every era of this team for me. He's almost been like a lot of our guides throughout our life as an Eagles fan, right? He's almost like the narrator of the Eagles' history over these last 15 years. And for him to be calling it a career today, seeing him get emotional, it was hard to not get emotional as well. I mean, this is one of the coolest stories in sports. This is why I love sports, is because of guys like Brandon Graham. It literally feels like a story from a movie, right? A former draft bust that for years nobody wanted in this city. He was blocking fans. He was a rotating piece of Andy Reid's defensive line. Wasn't really that great. Was nearly let go in 2014 by Chip Kelly when he was an awkward fit in that 3-4 defense where he's playing outside linebacker. To go from that guy, who the initial narrative always was, you guys remember this, they took Brandon Graham over Earl Thomas. They shouldn't have did that. Like, we heard that for years. I remember that growing up. To go from that kind of narrative to now, BG has played more games than anybody in franchise history. He has the third most sacks in Eagles history with 76 and a half. To play 206 games in Midnight Green, to be one of two core pieces all time with this team that won both Super Bowls. Him and Lane Johnson. Of course, I guess you could say Rick Lovato and Jake Elliott as well, but you know what I mean. Two core pieces of the offense or defense to win both championships, and to be in 3 Super Bowls for this team, only BG and Lane Johnson can say that they've done that. To go from where BG started to where he ended, to play for 15 years with this franchise, which is rare. You don't see that a lot in modern day sports where a guy sticks with one team for a decade and a half. You literally couldn't write it any better. It's like a movie. And for him to go out on top like this, it puts a perfect bow on top of this career. Like, it perfectly ties it up, sends him off into the sunset. For him, I mean, talk about like a movie-like ending, or just a movie-like story in general. For him to not only do everything I'm talking about, and to make the biggest play in Eagles history, strip-sacking Tom Brady, but to also come back and play in Super Bowl 59, his final year, getting injured after the best game of his career, I think, maybe one of them, in LA this year on Sunday Night Football. For him to think that his farewell tour, his final championship run was cut short, and for him to make it back just in time to play in one final game and to win one more Super Bowl, to beat another all-time great quarterback, it's one of the coolest stories that you'll ever see in sports. And Brandon Graham did it the right way. He was such a good leader on the field, off the field. Vocally, lead by example. He's one of the funniest guys that you'll ever see play in the NFL. I think he's an all-time trash talker. And this wasn't a player that 6'5", 6'6", a 7-foot wingspan, can run a 4.4. He wasn't some athletic freak coming out of Michigan. He doesn't have the build of other edge rushers. But the guy had an all-time motor, an all-time work ethic, and he became one of the most efficient pass rushers of this era. And yeah, he only had one double-digit sack season, but since coming into the league, according to Pro Football Focus, Brandon Graham, first off, has the sixth highest grade of any pass rusher on the edge since PFF has been grading, since BG's been in the league. He has the fifth most pressures with 653. His 16.7% pass rush win rate is seventh since 2010. For him to do all of that with those athletic limitations, with the start of his career not going as perfectly as others, it's incredible. And it just shows what those non-measurable things can do for a player. And Brandon Graham is sending himself off into the sunset on his terms. And I love seeing athletes get the opportunity to do that. I love seeing that for Jason Kelce, for Fletcher Cox, and now for BG. And again, for him to end it in New Orleans, like I keep watching that video of him kneeling down and, getting ready for warmups before the game, and him just like smiling, looking out into the crowd and saying like, man, like we did it. To see the appreciation on his face getting back to that stage and not ending it where they did in Super Bowl 57 in Arizona, for him to be a part of this with this new core to kind of pass the torch, both, physically and metaphorically, it doesn't get any better than that. And again, he made the greatest play that we've ever seen as an Eagles fan. 2 minutes to go, only up by one score. Here comes the greatest quarterback of all time, marching down the field, doing what he always does. It feels like this inevitable scenario is about to play out. Brandon Graham's strip sack, not only is it the most important play in Eagles history and it gave you your first championship, but it made me believe, like it just makes you more hopeful. Not to get too deep, but it makes you more hopeful as a human being. Like sometimes things just seem inevitable, impossible to overcome. Like the greatest quarterback of all time who had thrown for 500 yards in that game, coming back to win yet another championship, just like he did the year before when he led the greatest comeback in Super Bowl history. I remember being at the Fillmore in downtown Philadelphia, watching Brady in that scenario saying, we know how this ends. We've seen it before. They left too much time on the clock. He's going to do what he does. And when I saw that ball fall out of Tom Brady's hands, that now has made me believe that it can turn around at any moment. Anything in life, anything in sports, all it takes is one play. All it takes is one moment that this is not scripted. Like it's not always set in one way. It's not always supposed to go this way. It can go the other way. BG's strip sack really changed my perspective on a lot of things in life, and what a perfect time to make that play, to be a legend, because that defense hadn't stopped. They couldn't stop a nosebleed in that game, and BG stepped up, and that's where legends are made of, and I don't think anybody should ever wear number 55 again in the city of Philadelphia, I should say, that stadium on that field. That jersey number should be in the rafters with the likes of Brian Dawkins and Donovan McNabb and Steve Van Buren and so on and so forth. Like I think, again, look at those numbers. The third most sacks in franchise history was 76.5. 206 games played. No Eagle has ever played more games. He broke Chuck Bednarik's record. 2 Super Bowl wins. That's as legendary as you get. If you're not going to retire his number, then you might as well stop retiring anybody's number. So hats off to Brandon Graham. 15 incredible years. This one was definitely emotional. And I just remember 2018 seeing him walk off the field after that loss at New Orleans in the divisional round and seeing him shake hands with every member of the media and hearing the way he was talking at his press conference. We all thought that was it for him. Like he was going to be done with the Eagles. They weren't going to re-sign him. He was going to cash in with another team. Like we thought that was the end of BG's time in Philly. For the Eagles to get 6 more seasons out of this player and get 1 more ring and 2 more Super Bowl runs, you got to feel pretty thankful. Because I remember seeing him walk off the field in the Superdome. And how cool is it that we thought that was the moment it would end in the Superdome, and instead it ends in the same stadium, but 6 years later under the midnight green confetti. Like, talk about a movie-like ending. I just realized that as I was talking, that happened. It doesn't get any better than that. And BG was smart enough to see how perfect this career was coming to an end, and I'm glad that he retired when he did. He could still play. I think he would be a good rotating piece for this defense next year in year 16, but it's not going to get any better than this. And BG made the right call today. Tip of the cap to number 55. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, because BG has retired, it's officially a new era on the defense. It's officially the Georgia Bulldog era on the defensive line. I want to get into Howie Roseman's genius strategy of rebuilding that Georgia defense coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year. FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. So visit FanDuel.com. The app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. Get in on the college hoops action all tournament long with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, Brandon Graham calling it a career after 15 legendary seasons in Midnight Green with the Philadelphia Eagles. Won 2 Super Bowls, third all-time in franchise history in sacks. Nobody has played more games in that jersey with that wing on the helmet than BG. With Brandon Graham being gone, again, Lane Johnson's the last part of that older core. And on defense, now that Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham are gone and Darius Slay as well, and even Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, this is a brand new era on defense. The torch has been officially passed. For years now, since 2022, those young guys have been the face of the team. BG was more of a role player. Same with Fletcher Cox. I will not say the same about Lane Johnson. He's still the best right tackle in all of football. But the young guys have already started to take over. But, the core, those older core pieces were still here. So the torch wasn't officially passed. Now after today, at least on defense, Brandon Graham said it today in his press conference, Nolan Smith now, that's your locker room. That's your defensive line. Jalen Carter, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Darius Slay's gone. It is the young guys' time on defense. It is their time to lead that unit, and it's mostly going to be led by Georgia Bulldogs, especially on the defensive line, and that continued yesterday after the Eagles added yet another former Bulldog and a former teammate of Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Keely Ringo, Louis Cine, bringing in Azeez Ojulari on a 1-year contract. He will replace Brandon Graham as one of those pass rushing specialists, the third or fourth guy in the edge rotation. And so that officially now has the Eagles at, I believe, 7 starters from that 2020 Georgia defense that are now key pieces of their defense. I saw somebody put up this graphic yesterday on X, and it's a picture of the Georgia defense that year against Alabama. On the left-hand side, you'll see Azeez Ojulari on the edge, Jalen Carter at defensive tackle next to Jordan Davis, and then on the edge, on the right-hand side, you'll see Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean at middle linebacker, and then you'll see Louis Cine in the backfield at safety. They also had Keely Ringo as an outside corner that he's not pictured in this graphic, but that is 7 Georgia Bulldog starters from those national title defenses that the Eagles now have in Philadelphia. And it's such a cool, unique idea. It sounds like just rebuilding a historic college defense, player for player, almost trying to just replicate it at the NFL level. It sounds like such a simple, almost kid-like idea that sounds like too easy to work. Why don't we just draft all the best players from the best school and just bring them all from that team to this team? It sounds like something you do in a video game, not in real life. But nobody has ever really tried it. It sounds so simple and obvious, but nobody has ever really tried it, at least to not the degree that Howie Roseman is taking this thing, where he now has 7 of those starters now on his defense from the Georgia Bulldogs national championship teams of the 2020s to just rebuild a college defense almost identically at the next level. It's not always that simple. Normally that doesn't work. Not every player from a good school, from Alabama, from Georgia, from LSU, from the SEC, the Big Ten, you name it. Not every player from good schools that are great in college go on to have success in the NFL. There's been a lot of busts from the University of Alabama, the University of Georgia. But for Howie Roseman to choose this Georgia defense specifically, to pretty much rebuild at the NFL level, it's genius. That Georgia defense was historically good. They won back-to-back national championships. And when you look at the style of player that defense had, they're all athletic, versatile freaks that translate perfectly to the next level. Like, this was a genius idea for Howie Roseman to rebuild the Bulldog defense in Philadelphia. This isn't Chip Kelly recreating his old Oregon Ducks offense back in 2014 and 2015. When you look at Nolan Smith, that's exactly the kind of edge rusher you want in the NFL now. A guy that can run a 4.4, has that kind of motor, has that kind of versatility and speed. That's what you want now. Jalix Hunt, too. Like, yeah, he didn't go to Georgia, but that kind of style of player is what you want. Jordan Davis. Yeah, he's a nose tackle, but he's a nose tackle that runs he runs a 4.8 at 300 pounds. It's unbelievable. Jalen Carter is exactly what you want for an interior defensive tackle, an elite pass rusher that reminds you of a prime Fletcher Cox, a prime Aaron Donald. Keely Ringo has the size, the length, the speed that you want in a modern-day corner. Nakobe Dean has that three-down versatility at linebacker, that range, that motor going sideline to sideline, the coverage ability. And Azeez Ojulari, like, he is a lengthy, explosive pass rusher on the edge that consistently gets you 5 to 8 sacks a year. Like, this was the right defense to target to go all in on rebuilding. If you were going to do this with a college unit, it was the Georgia defense of 2020 to 2022. And I also think it was a genius move because when you look at it from a culture standpoint, like, look how close this team is. A lot of that has to do with all of these players on defense, a lot of them being so close already from their college background. All of these guys battled together in college and won championships together. Jalen Hurts said it himself after the playoff run this year, after the Super Bowl run. The Georgia guys on defense were a huge reason for the culture turnaround from 2023 to 2024. Like, these guys are mature. They know how to win. They come from a pro-like program. They know how to handle success. They know how to handle failure, how to handle pressure, being back-to-back champions. Not only does it make sense to rebuild that defense on the field because of how talented that defense was. Again, it's one of maybe the best college defense of all time. But those guys just have the right mental makeup too. And it's worked perfectly. It was a huge reason this defense was number one in football last year, and it was a huge reason that you won a Super Bowl. Like, that core has now won back-to-back national championships and a Super Bowl only in their second year together at the NFL level. Like, it's just unbelievable how perfectly this idea worked out. And yet again, it sounds simple, and it doesn't sound like, it's not reinventing the wheel here. Howie Roseman didn't invent the most creative way to build a football team ever. He just took the best players from the best school, from the best defense. But it is unique still and creative because nobody has ever taken it this far. Nobody has ever done this, where they said, I am just going to take that defense from college and make it my defense at the NFL level. So it does seem so simplistic, and you could feel like a kid would almost have this idea. But nobody has had the guts to really try this. And it's worked out beautifully. And that's, again, I've said it so many times on the show, what I love about Howie Roseman is that he's willing to try things that another team just wouldn't ever try. He takes things sometimes to extremes, but it can work out like this. Sometimes it doesn't work out and it blows up in his face. But I love how innovative and creative he is. And rebuilding the Georgia defense, it helped you win a title. And it's officially the Georgia defense era now. With Brandon Graham gone, you add Azeez Ojulari. Keely Ringo is going to be starting at corner likely this year. Who knows? You could still draft more Georgia players. There's some good guys in the draft this year on both sides of the ball, on the offensive line, on the defensive line. Malachi Starks at safety. This trend might continue. I would not be surprised if it did. In the Georgia era of the Eagles defense, it already started, but now it officially is the face of that unit with BG calling it a career. Somebody that did not call it a career, that's an Eagles legend, Lane Johnson, just got his contract extended. Does that mean that the Eagles are not looking at the offensive line in the upcoming draft? We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, we are wrapping up this Tuesday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Brandon Graham calls it a career in Philadelphia, but someone that said, I'm not retiring anytime soon. It's another Eagles legend on the offensive side of the ball. Lane Johnson just signed an extension, keeping him an Eagle throughout at least 2027. We'll see how long he wants to play. I think Lane Johnson right now is showing no signs of slowing down. He's still the best right tackle in the entire NFL. I would say he's still the best tackle in football, and this contract locks him up for multiple seasons still, and that's music to the Eagles' ears, because now on offense, once they get Cam Jurgens extended, almost this entire core will be locked up for at least the next 2 seasons. Most of them are locked up for 3+ years, and having that kind of continuity, I should say, on offense is such a luxury when you're competing for championships year after year. And Lane Johnson, again, offensive linemen can play late into their 30s, even into their 40s. Look at Jason Peters. Like, Lane Johnson could play another 5 seasons, and I wouldn't be surprised. Like, he is still at the height of his powers, and locking him up right now was a no-brainer. It was a no-brainer. And my take with this contract extension is that because Lane Johnson's back, the Eagles do not need to draft a Lane Johnson replacement on the offensive line in this draft. This extension tells me the Eagles are set on the offensive line for a while. Yeah, you still got to figure out who's the starting right guard. Is it Tyler Steen? Is it Kenyon Green? Maybe it's even Trevor Keegan. Maybe it is somebody that you draft. I don't hate the idea of selecting someone early in this upcoming class that could eventually be Lane Johnson's replacement. He could be Cam Jurgens sliding over from right guard to center to replace Jason Kelce. Like, if you drafted a versatile lineman that can start for a few years at right guard, learn from Lane, kind of like Jurgens did playing next to Kelce, like Quinyon Mitchell did playing across from Darius Slay, like Jordan Mailata did learning from Jason Peters for a few years. If you did that, I wouldn't hate that idea because it fills a short-term hole, and it also could help you fill a long-term one. But the idea of doing what you did with Andre Dillard back in the day in 2019, having him learn behind Jason Peters, wasting, to me, precious years of a rookie contract to have a player sit on the bench and learn from Lane Johnson, having like a tackle-dependent offensive lineman that cannot switch positions, I would not agree with the Eagles making that call. Again, it's too valuable to have inexpensive starters on those rookie deals and Lane Johnson, again, it's not like you think this is his last year. Last year we knew Darius Slay, it was going to be one more season. If we knew Lane Johnson was done in 2026, okay, then I could see it. But if you still think that player is going to play for 2+ more years, there's no way I'm drafting his replacement in this class and redshirting him for that long. For 1 year, okay, I could understand it. Cam Jurgens was a redshirt in 2022. So was Nakobe Dean and Jordan Davis to a degree as well. I don't hate that. But this contract now for Lane Johnson says they think he's playing at least through 2027. And it's kind of interesting to see how Lane Johnson's changed his mindset about his career. Like, for years, and I totally get it, dealing with like extreme anxiety, high-functioning anxiety like Lane does. A lot of the times it seems like in a career, especially like this, that's as demanding as football, can be too much, and he's questioned his career a lot. There were times you thought he might retire after, 2019, 2020, even through like 2021 and 2022, but it does seem like he's in a groove now. He not that he fell out of love with football, but you can tell he's certainly in love with it again. And it's probably because, too, the Eagles, they're in the golden era where they're competing for championships year after year. And so why slow down? And he hasn't shown any regression on the field performance-wise either. So why would he want to stop? And he's getting paid a ton of money. The Eagles just guaranteed him a lot more money on this extension. So it is cool, though, to see he went from almost playing it year by year, I got maybe a year or two left in me, to now saying it's open-ended. Like after the Super Bowl this year, he said he's not retiring anytime soon. So I would not draft an offensive lineman in the first 3 rounds this year that does not have guard tackle flexibility. Like if I'm going to draft somebody with the idea in mind they could eventually be that right tackle, they have to be able to compete with Steen and Kenyon Green at the right guard position, or I'm not drafting that player. Again, I don't want to draft a guy for 2+ years to be a backup, and I think with Lane Johnson right now, after signing that deal, it tells us this is not a year-by-year thing for him right now. Like he's set for at least a couple more years to be the guy at right tackle. So I would not draft an offensive lineman this year early that's a tackle. Like I'm taking a guard that could play tackle, but if I'm drafting an offensive lineman, it's more to replace Mekhi Becton, definitely not Lane Johnson. Again, those years of a rookie contract, they're just too precious. You don't force a short-term need, but I think a lot of times it's as irresponsible to draft a player that just because they're the best player available, if it's at a position that's locked down right now and it's locked down for the long term. I just don't think that's a smart use of resources either. So Lane Johnson signing that extension, when you look at it, when it's all said and done, thinking about legacies after, BG's retirement today and Lane's extension yesterday, I think Lane Johnson could go down as the most accomplished Eagle in franchise history when it comes to his overall individual resume. This is a guy that's been dominant for 12 years now. He's a 2-time All-Pro player, should be more. He should have more All-Pro seasons than 2. A 6-time Pro Bowler, 2-time Super Bowl champion. Again, only him and BG have won 2 Super Bowls with the Eagles as core pieces of the offense or the defense. He's been to 3 Super Bowls. He had one of the most dominant individual runs in the history of the NFL in the 2020s, where he went multiple seasons without allowing a sack, despite constantly being put on an island at right tackle with very little help from running backs and tight ends chipping. A lot of times it's mano-a-mano, Lane Johnson against a really good pass rusher. And yet he went years without letting up a sack. Like that is one of the most historic, underrated runs in the history of sports is what Lane Johnson did in the early 2020s. When you look at all of that combined, and he's going to compete for more championships in years to come, he's going to probably be a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think that you could say is enough to definitely put him on the Mount Rushmore of all-time Eagles. But at the same time, is there a player that has a better career, like a better resume in Philly? And there are some great ones. But like BG is one. I mean, BG is top 3 all-time in sacks in franchise history. He's won 2 rings. He has the all-time games played record in Philadelphia. Jason Kelce has that kind of resume. Fletcher Cox does as well. A lot of guys. Back in the day, Reggie White, Brian Dawkins. Some of these players, their resume is unbelievable. And like a Jalen Hurts is going to go down with that kind of resume probably when it's all said and done. And a lot of the core pieces on the team right now. But Lane Johnson, I think when it's all said and done, he might have the most impressive individual career an Eagle has ever had, even over like his former teammate Jason Peters on the left-hand side. I think Lane can be that guy. And again, because it's not ending. He has many more years of high-level play, and the Eagles know that, and it's why they gave him this extension. So I would definitely avoid drafting a tackle this year in the draft, and I think Lane Johnson's your guy for a while still, and that's really good news. That extension shows you it's not a year-by-year thing like it was with BG, and that's exciting because your offense now, once you get that Cam Jurgens extension done, outside of tight end with Dallas Goedert, which you guys know I don't agree with letting him go, but outside of tight end, when Jurgens is extended, this offense now with Lane Johnson's contract is locked up for years to come, and that's huge. That's big time by Howie Roseman. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday for you. Switching gears, start to talk some more NFL draft. Got my Guys episode coming for you soon, all that and more. So again, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get the show or on YouTube as well. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening, and let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.